Well, extremely worried about these strikes taking place. My husband actually is an A&E consultant, so I know he's working extra shifts as all of his colleagues are to try and deal with the issues. But obviously, when junior doctors are going on strike, that's a huge amount of capacity out of the system, and it's for several days. So really, the government does now need to properly engage in these talks, which it doesn't seem to have done so far, and find an urgent resolution to this situation, as it seems to have done for other health workers. It needs to do the same now for junior doctors and others, so that we can get the National Health Service back to some kind of usual business.
Well, you're putting the blame on the government, but what about the BMA? They're asking for a pay rise of up to 35%. Do they need to come up with a more realistic proposal?
Well, look, these things are always a matter of negotiation, aren't they? But my reading of the situation is that the government actually hasn't sat round the table for any real meaningful talks with the junior doctors, and so they haven't been able to establish whether there is somewhere that they could meet in the middle. The government said the same thing, didn't they, about the nurses' demands for pay, but they found a resolution with the nurses' unions, and those strikes have now stopped happening. So I think the lesson of recent weeks, where a resolution has been found, is very clearly that you can find a resolution if you engage in proper talks. But just talking through the media really about how these demands are unrealistic and so on is no way to find a resolution. And that's exactly the playbook that they used with the nurses a few weeks ago, and they're now doing the same to the junior doctors. So they should learn their own lessons and get round the table and find a resolution for these things, because I think patients and clearly hospital managers are very worried about the level of service that can be provided next week, and in what is usually quite a difficult week anyway because of the holidays and so on.
OK, I want to move on and ask you about an advert that Labour has tweeted out, claiming that Rishi Sunak doesn't believe that adults who are convicted of sexually assaulting children should be jailed. Do you really believe that about the Prime Minister?
Well, look, what we are very clearly saying today is that we have found these new figures through looking at the government's own figures about the levels of serious offences that have not resulted in custodial sentences. So, yes, that's for child offences relating to child abuse, that we found that over recent years, over 4,000 adults have escaped custodial sentences when they've been found guilty of child abuse. We've also found that over 16,000 people who've been convicted of producing or sharing child pornography material have also escaped custodial sentences. And that's because there are real deep-rooted problems in our criminal justice system at the moment, for which the Prime Minister, obviously, as the Prime Minister of the country, is responsible.
OK, well, let's take a look at those figures then.
And we want something to do
Sorry to interrupt.
about that.
OK, but look at those figures. You're saying under the Tories, 4,500 adults convicted of sexually assaulting children serve no prison time. Rishi Sunak wasn't even Prime Minister until 2010, till 2015. These figures are from 2010, and you're personalising it. I mean, are you really right in saying that the Prime Minister doesn't think these people should go to prison?
Well, as you say, these are figures that not just from 2010, they're over this whole period of 13 years.
But he's only been Prime Minister for the last year, hasn't he?
But he is the Prime Minister. He is the current Prime Minister. He is the Prime Minister of the Conservative Party, of the Conservative government, and we are highlighting their record when it comes to sentencing and what is happening in our criminal justice system. And I think it's really important that we're using these figures today to highlight these structural and very profound problems in the criminal justice system, which is threefold, essentially. We've got this massive backlog in the courts, which predates the pandemic, because the Conservative government chose to close down over 200 of our courts. We've got very, very high reoffending rates because the Conservative government chose to privatise the probation service. Hang on a moment. And we've also, because as a result of all of that, we've got overflowing and full prisons. So what is happening is judges and those in the criminal justice system don't feel able to give out custodial sentences because the system can't support those. And I think these are very, very serious questions that the Prime Minister himself should be answering for.
OK, so you stand by this statement personally that Rishi Sunak doesn't think that adults convicted of sexually assaulting children should go to prison. Do you personally back that statement?
Well, look, it's a digital graphic highlighting a particular story, which I'm on here talking about today. It's a skit, isn't it?
So you're backing this advert. You're very happy with what it says. You're comfortable with pointing the finger at Rishi Sunak like this.
I'm comfortable with, taking a sort of standardised graphic that the Prime Minister has used himself many times in recent months and years to highlight policies, to highlight how one of his own policies isn't working, and one of his own things that he's responsible for, the criminal justice system in this country, isn't working. And so it's taken from that. It's what you do in sort of political campaigning. It won't be to everybody's taste, but what's the important issue here is what lies beneath that, which I think would be of real importance to your viewers, which is that we do have serious criminals now in this country,
which is a point you've made.
Almost routinely getting more lenient custodial sentences than they would otherwise do because the system is creaking at the knees.
Isn't what lies beneath this the sentencing guidelines? Isn't that what this is about? They'd be the same under Labour, wouldn't they?
It's not actually about the sentencing guidelines. It's about the capacity in the system to actually implement those guidelines. So when you've got a huge backlog, I think 62,000 cases currently snarled up in our courts system, because then the system wants to sort of deal with that backlog. It's sort of getting things through the system faster and in some cases more leniently. When you've got judges faced with wanting to give custodial sentences but knowing that the prisons are completely full, they are making judgments on that basis around the prison capacity and whether they can actually enforce those custodial sentences. So it's the system as a whole. It's not a particular issue around sentencing guidelines that is meaning that these figures we produce today, and many other figures and much more evidence that there is out there at the moment, that what we're finding are that people are seemingly getting off lightly for what I think most people watching this programme would regard as very serious offences.
So just finally, very briefly, absolutely no regrets, no worries about this poster at all. You're totally comfortable with it going out?
Well, look, it's political campaigning. I'm comfortable to be on your programme this morning defending what we're talking about, which is some really serious issues around the criminal justice system and how this country is just not dealing with that.